Thank you. So I welcome you all again for today's webinar on COVID-19 vaccines, the regulatory pathways and the contents. The last week, we have all learned the platforms available across the world to fight the COVID vaccine and the challenges and the limitations. And we heard the insightful learning session by Dr. Manish from Serum Institute of India. And today we are again having important and we are so privileged to have Mr. Parag Nagatkar, Global Regulatory Head for Serum Institute of India, with us to enlighten us on the accelerated pathways adopted by all the nations and by the World Health Organization and India to make the availability of safe and effective COVID vaccine to not only to India but also to the world. Welcome you all, sir, and we are so privileged to have you with us today. Now, I would like to invite our Honorary Director General, Mr. Uday Bhaskar, to kindly address the audience.
Thank you, Lakshmi, and my friend Parag and Secretary General Rajbanu and distinguished officers from Drug Control Administration, as well as friends from other fraternities. I'm so happy to be part of this AIDCOC Training Academy, and you're all aware of that to celebrate the 25 years of formation of All India Drugs Control Officers Confederation in 1995. We always thought of having a training academy for the regulators. So in that process, so this AIDCOC Training Academy is inaugurated on 4th October 2020 by our Drug Control General of India, Dr. Vijay Somani. So from October onwards, we are regularly organizing talks on different topics by very eminent speakers. And at the outset, I'm very much thankful to the resource persons and the speakers who are very busy in their profession. Despite that, they are giving their time and they are giving their knowledge and they are giving their intellect, and they are sharing their knowledge with our regulators. So I'm also thankful to the young team and young Turks of All India Drugs Control Officers Confederation, headed by Lakshmi, Anil, Chandrasekhar, Nishid, Kamble, and Bilal, and so many young people who are behind this, and the continuity of this. The most of the people used to tell me, so whether it is going to be it's going to be a continuous process or it is going to be discontinued. Everybody expressed their apprehensions. At the outset, I'm very much thankful to all the Central Council members and the Executive Committee members and our well-wishers from the industry, and particularly the team who are taking it forward. And I'm optimistic that in the coming months we may have a physical training activity in Hyderabad for the regulatory officers. I am discussing with Deshpande, Rajbanu, and Jayanta Chaudhary and other members. So once this pandemic is controlled, certainly it's going to be a very formal training, and we'd like to continue this virtual webinars also. So with this, I'm very much thankful to the AIDCOC team, and particularly Mr. Parag and the Serum Institute of India for readily accepting and sparing their very important people continuously for 2 weeks, despite their busy schedule. At this particular point of time, nobody is having time to work for other engagements. So with this, I think this is going to be very useful. Before I conclude, all the webinars actually were, except one webinar or two webinars, we have a lot of registrations. All the webinars are almost, we are getting 170, 180 registrations, and almost more than 100 people are continuously listening and continuously participating in each seminar, and it is well appreciated not only by the regulators, and it is well appreciated by the industry also. So with this, thank you, Lakshmi, and thanks to Parag once again. I wish this talk is going to enlighten the regulatory officers, particularly regulatory pathways and complaints. It's very, very relevant and apt. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your encouraging words and warm wishes for the program. And again, it's a great privilege to have Paragji with us to educate all the regulatory officers in our country. He practices best practices and the accelerated pathways guided by the international scientific community and international regulatory agencies, so that the country is in a position to supply the vaccines to the neighboring nations and also the far-reaching nations. And we are hopeful that in the coming months, India is having its position and place in all the nations by supplying this COVID vaccine. With that, I would like to invite today's guest speaker, Mr. Parag Nagartarji, who is the Additional Director and Global Regulatory Affairs at Serum Institute of India. Let me have a 1 minute time to briefly summarize his profile for the audience. Mr. Parag is having about 27 years of experience in regulatory, industrial, and quality and program management division of vaccines, and it includes 21 years of vaccine industry. And he worked with Serum Institute of India and Sanofi Pasteur. And he has over 10 years of North American working experience, including the Sanofi Pasteur, Toronto, Canada. And in particular, he has in-depth understanding of the CMC global practices for biologicals, including the quality management system, regulatory compliance, and pharmacopoeia requirements. We are so much thankful to have you with us today, sir, and we warmly welcome you to today's webinar.
Thank you very much. So should I start?
Please, sir. Please, sir.
So while I bring my presentation, I would like to thank for kind words of Uday Bhaskar Garu, Raja Bhanu Garu. I know these two gentlemen for years now, almost 10 to 11 years, and thank you for calling me your friend, because I think we see you. Correct me, Raja Bhanu Garu, Uday Bhaskar Garu. We see you as a guru, not just a friend. Because how you carry yourself and what we have seen you, how you have carried yourself in terms of, and also this association, how much you care about this All India Drugs Control Officers Association and what you have done for this. I think it's a real privilege to be here, part of it, and to contribute some of the things which I have learned over the years, and some of the things which I have learned from you, Bhaskar Garu. So, thank you. So let me, Lakshmi, just let me know if you can see it.
Yes, yes, Parag.
Sure, thank you, sir. So with your permission, I will start, Bhaskar Garu.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I will be touching base today. Let's say I have around 25 to 30 slides, and then we will have some open discussion too. So we will be looking at vaccines, and in terms of right now, the hot topic is COVID-19 vaccines. How does India look at it? How does WHO look at it from a regulatory angle? And also some of the regulated jurisdictions, right? So-called regulated jurisdictions, how they look at it from their angle. So, and then we will have an open discussion where I'll be right. I can help with some of the clarification questions you may have. So we will go through a little bit about COVID-19, then what candidate vaccine technology Serum Institute has, then global regulatory pathways, consideration, and then the country-wise registration pathways. Before I jump into vaccine and COVID vaccine, I think we all know vaccination has been the most effective public health intervention. And this is not just, it's been said, but I think it's also been seen as, and the results, we have seen it, that vaccination is really one of the I would say the most valuable contribution where it has saved lives and also has saved a lot of resources and money associated with it. So what is a vaccine? It's a preparation intended to produce immunity to a disease by stimulating the production of antibodies to protect the person against a subsequent infection or a disease. And this is important because as we will be talking about COVID-19 vaccine, what does a vaccine, right, mean? Till now, of course, this is not a total comprehensive list, but yes, we have till date all these vaccines, right, for diseases. And as you can see at the end, I have put it COVID-19, and that's what we will be a little bit focusing on it. So right from diphtheria, tetanus, which were invented almost 80, 90 years back, then pertussis almost 60 years back, and then we have much closer rota, pneumococcal, HPV vaccines. COVID-19. So what is this COVID-19 disease, right? We have been hearing about it almost a year now. It's an infectious disease caused by novel coronavirus. It's a new strain, not identified earlier in human. So therefore the name was given as nCoV-2, right? The route of transmission, of course, it's not confirmed, but it's a respiratory disease, and it has high mortality and morbidity. So WHO earlier last year, 2020, declared it as a pandemic, right? Pandemic is something which we will see it on the next slide, but it impacts a large number of countries worldwide. So the most common symptoms, again, they are fever, tiredness, dry cough, and these symptoms are usually mild, and they begin very gradually. Earlier in April 2020, disease has become the leading cause of death, and we will see it on my next slide. How does it basically look like? So from an Indian point of view, we see that there are a lot of red hot spots. So till Jan 28, which is day before yesterday, WHO reported 100 million confirmed cases, 2 million confirmed deaths. In India, 10.7 million as of 28 confirmed cases of COVID-19 disease were registered. So I would like to mention here, I think we saw this pandemic, but I think we should be happy on the other part is we have seen a very unprecedented collaboration, partnership from governments, from regulators, from manufacturers, from policymakers, from funders, right? Requirement or a supply of various drugs and vaccines during this pandemic. And of course, we take pride at Serum Institute, saying that we took the decision of taking we say bull by the horn and we started various projects, and I will be giving you a little bit about what we have as COVID-19 candidates at Serum Institute. So the very first we saw very recently on 3rd of January, Covishield, which was approved. It's a non-replicating viral vector vaccine, and this was in collaboration primarily with Oxford University, and then later AstraZeneca, who took all the rights basically for licensing from Oxford. Covax, it's another candidate. It's a full-length recombinant SARS CoV-2. It's a glycoprotein nanoparticle vaccine, and it's adjuvanted. So it's adjuvanted to a matrix M from Novavax, US, and some of you must have seen yesterday around 89% efficacy has been published for this Novavax vaccine globally. So a CTA application is filed with DCGI, and we soon should be starting a phase 2/3 study in India for the second candidate too. Covivax, it's a totally indigenous Serum Institute. So as you can see, the first two, we have some collaborations with external partners, but Covivax, it's a RBD. So it's a receptor bind domain virus-like particle display vaccine, and it's completely indigenous product. We are planning to do a global clinical study. Phase 1 is completed in Australia, and we are planning to do a global phase 2/3 study starting very soon in end of Feb. And this will cover South Africa, UK, and India too. Covivac, it's a very interesting product. It's an intranasal product. It's a de-optimized attenuated vaccine. It's again in collaboration with a company called Codagenics in USA. And phase 1 has started for this vaccine in United Kingdom. And soon we will be having the strategy for India for this intranasal vaccine. And of course, we are also having our BCG, which is a recombinant BCG. So this is similar to the BCG vaccine we have currently. So it improves your immune system so that any following infection can be arrested by the body, the immune system of the body. Well, what is Covishield and the vaccine technology? So as you can see in the picture depicted on this slide, so it's a chimpanzee adenovirus. It's modified. It's modified in the sense it's unable to cause disease within human body. And on the right side, you will see the SARS-CoV-2. It's the spike protein of that. It's been the genes coding the spike protein is taken, it's sequenced, and it is integrated with the chimpanzee adenovirus. And we call it ChEDOX, a viral vector. And then you have the novel CoV-2. So it's called ChEDOX nCoV-2 vaccine. So that's what is formed. And how does it work in a human being? It's the cell expresses spike protein when it's injected, and the body produces antibodies against these spike proteins, so that at the next infection, the immune system attacks the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and the person is protected. So this was a little bit about the vaccines and COVID-19 disease. Let's move on with the regulatory pathways. And this slide will, in general, summarize the global regulatory pathway for this COVID-19 vaccine in an emergency use setup. So you will see a circle right in the middle, and you will see on the left side is the rolling submission. So there will be an interim CSR, right, and a rolling submission, and then you have the emergency use authorization. And this is something which various countries, various regulators has come up with to use the COVID-19 vaccine in an emergency setup. right? So it's not a full authorization. It's an authorization for restricted use in an emergency setup. And that's exactly what even we have seen USA giving it, UK, yesterday, EMA has approved Covishield or the AstraZeneca product. Our DCGI has approved restricted use in an emergency setup, and all the countries basically use the emergency use. So that's on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, once we have the complete data, the full clinical study report, and it's a 6-month follow-up, which will take some time, right, for each and every vaccine or clinical study in the world. So once you have the complete data, there could be some CMC data which will be coming, and all these, once this is filed, you apply for a full marketing authorization. So this is common emergency use authorization on the left-hand side. And then once you have the full data, you apply for the marketing authorization. So as I mentioned, these are the four. I've just taken four major, and then of course we will go in a little bit deep into the India part, and some of these slide by slide. So on the left top corner, you have the FDA, US FDA, emergency use authorization process. And as you can see, this is for mainly for deploying the COVID-19 vaccine. And this is the efficacy, placebo control efficacy trial should be at least 50%. So that's the requirement, basic requirement from FDA for authorizing an emergency use approval for a COVID-19 vaccine. In the below, you can see Health Canada, and they have come up with a interim order pathway, and under their drug and regulation, basically, they have a interim order where they have a pathway for approving the COVID-19 vaccines and having access or deployment of these vaccines in a timely manner to their citizens. On the right top corner, you have the EMA, and it's a conditional marketing authorization, and this is done by rolling reviews. So it's again emergency use designation, which is given by EMA, Emergency Medicines Agency. And again, they have the criteria of efficacy should be more than 50% for the vaccine. And at the bottom, we have WHO, which has something called emergency use listing. And this all started with WHO. We will go a little bit deep into WHO too, but this started with the Ebola vaccine, and then SARS, and now this was actually being, I would say, expanded and implemented for COVID-19 vaccine. We have seen first approval or UL listing from WHO, and I will talk about our vaccine update when we go into the WHO slides. So regulatory pathway for India, before we jump into the actual pathway, DCGI did publish a draft regulatory guideline for development. How do you develop vaccines for the special consideration, and specifically COVID-19 vaccine? And it has a very nicely summarized gist of all the processes, right from the development, non-clinical, clinical, CMC aspect, which has been included and comprises, I would say, ICH, EMA guidelines, the US FDA guidelines, and WHO guidelines too. So early in 2020, DCGI office came up with several measures, and to be precise, on 19th of March, DCGI office came up with certain points where they gave some a fast track process for approving COVID-19 related vaccines or applications. So they gave such applications priority, and they assisted companies in speeding up their research. In parallel to the clinical trial in India, they also gave an exceptional a pathway for application and grant of license, which came in May 2020 to license, to manufacture and stockpile these COVID-19 vaccine. And it was on 18th May 2020.
I request all the other members to kindly mute yourself. Excuse me. Anil sir, can you please mute your system?
Okay, so to move, with our regulation, we didn't have a real emergency use authorization word in our Drug and Cosmetic Act. So there was a lot of dilemma when the applications were submitted by Pfizer, Serum, and Bharat Biotech, right? But in finally the final approval or permission which was granted to Serum Institute and one of the other companies on January 3rd was restricted use in emergency situation. So we'll see how the regulatory pathway for India looks like. And I'm focusing only on the DCGI or the state Food and Drug Administration pathway. And there is something in the parallel for the RCGM approvals. And that's with RCGM, with IBAC and GAC, wherever it's required, that parallelly has also to be included. And I think it's important to mention, similar to the DCGI taking up several actions or steps to expedite or to give high priority to COVID-19 applications, RCGM on 20th March came up with their rapid response pathway for dealing with the COVID-19 vaccine. And they said, well, if you submit any application, then those will be disposed of within a week's time, basically. So in parallel, DCGI and RCGM, they had developed a pathway for helping and prioritizing the COVID-19 related application. So coming to this slide, right, you need to start any R&D work with application in Form 10. You submit it along with certain documentation, and you obtain Form CT11 from DCGI. With that Form 11 and the submission and the required documentation, you submit it to state in Form 30 to apply and obtain the test license. Once you have the test license, you start your activities, development activities, you make batches. And in between now, we do have with the NDCT 2019 rule, we do have to take another Form CT11 to start manufacturing the clinical trial material. So those in parallel, we have to take it before we make the material, submit it to DCGI, CT04, go through the SEC meeting. What is SEC? Is Subject Expert Committee meeting. This is a group of medical experts all over India appointed by the for reviewing and approving or giving recommendations to DCGI for clinical trial applications. Based on the recommendation and review by DCGI, DCGI gives permission in Form CT06 to conduct a phase 1 clinical trial. So the manufacturer comes back, the sponsor does the study. Once the study data is published, the manufacturer goes and submit the phase 2/3 clinical study to DCGI. And they do it again in Form CT04. Again, Subject Expert Committee meeting reviews the data coming from phase 1. They give their recommendation. DCGI does the review, and that's where the new pathway, as I mentioned, the rapid response comes into picture. Because in classical pathway, it will only fly through the right-hand side. So you do the phase 2 study, then go to the marketing authorization, and then apply to the state Food and Drug Administration for granting manufacturing license. However, now with the May 2020 notification, once you have manufacturer has the CT06 approval for conducting the phase 2 and 3 clinical trial, in parallel to performing the clinical trial, application, the manufacturer can submit an application to the state FDA, and in this case to Pune office for Serum Institute, in Form 28D to grant manufacturing license in Form 28D. So this is addition of a product to Form 28D. There will be a joint inspection, and this is joint inspection by state, by zonal, by the headquarters, and by CDL inspectors. And the state FDA will send the manufacturing license to DCGI for endorsement. And once the endorsement is obtained, the state issues a manufacturing license to the manufacturer. So in this case, to Serum Institute. And we, under this rapid response, the manufacturer can manufacture and stockpile as per the dossier which is being submitted, and as per the inspection which was carried out by the joint inspection team, manufacture it and keep it after this license has been granted, condition that the phase 3 data is being submitted or the study is being completed. The study data is being submitted along with the marketing authorization dossier in Form CT21 online to DCGI office. DCGI office does the review. Again, there is a subject expert committee meeting. CDL Kasoli does the CMC review of the module 3, and they give a recommendation to DCGI before DCGI gives or takes a decision to grant permission, and in this case, a restricted use permission for to use in an emergency setup for COVID-19 vaccine. So from India, let's move on to WHO, because including India, I think the Indian manufacturers are also supporting the global, I would say low and middle income countries, mainly in Africa, Southeast Asia, LATAM countries, and some of the CIS countries. So WHO regulation and their listing is also very key in terms of COVID-19 vaccines. So WHO has published a separate guideline where in April 2020, where they have come up with a target product profile, and on the picture you will see on the slide how does it work. So there's a preferred profile, and there's a critical or a minimal profile. So if you have critical, many of the critical you meet, but let's say one you don't, the application is still being considered. And for the preferred, if you meet many of the preferred characteristics, then definitely that's an advantage when the WHO is reviewing their application. So in order to qualify for assessment under the EUL procedures, there are 4 criteria listed by WHO which has to be fulfilled, right? So the disease for which the product is intended is serious or immediately life-threatening. Definitely this is in case of COVID-19. Second, existing products have not been successful in eradicating the disease. Yes, we know there is no medicine or vaccine. The product is manufactured in compliance with the current GMP in case of vaccines or medicines. And yes, that is by the manufacturer and reviewed and endorsed by the regulators. The applicant undertakes to complete the development of the product. As I mentioned earlier, this will be a rolling submission. So once you start and once you submit the clinical data, the development is not fully complete, or even the clinical study is not, the report, the final report is not available. However, the applicant commits to undertake and to complete those activities, whether those are clinical or the product development, before pre-qualification is granted. So the first step is EUL, and then is the pre-qualification. We'll quickly look at, of course, this is all available in the WHO guideline, but what are the TPPs? What are the eligibility criteria for the emergency use listing by WHO? So on the very left-hand side column, you will see the vaccine characteristics. So like indication for use, and then the two columns basically are the target product profile parameters, as I mentioned to you. The critical or the minimal is in the middle column, and at the end or the right-hand side, you will see the preferred characteristics. So these are, and as an applicant, you need to make sure where do you meet, and you show the compliance to whether you meet the preferred or you meet the critical or the minimal characteristics for each vaccine characteristics. So on the left-hand side, you will see indication for use, contraindications, target population, and the safety and reactogenicity. Sorry. Again, measures for efficacy, and as you can see on the critical, it is 50% point estimate, and on the preferred, it is 70%, at least 70% efficacy. So that's as we discussed earlier, US FDA and EMA, they both says that it should be at least 50% point estimate efficacy. So that's on the critical side. So if you meet on the critical characteristics, you still have a good chance of WHO accepting the file. Dose regime. As you can see, it's a single dose regime. It's a preferred, but the critical is no more than the 2 doses. And of course, the long term, LT means long term, and that's the booster doses are, booster dose is also permitted. Again, in this case, we don't know whether a booster dose will be required because it's too early for us. I think we have just started, right? Globally, vaccination. We have done the primary and the second dose, but we don't know how long the efficacy or the immunogenicity will last. So do we need a booster like influenza? We don't know yet. So that's something which is still being reviewed and analyzed. Durability of protection, as I said, well, we don't know yet how much it is. So that will depend, the booster dose will depend whether it's, right, do we need it or do we need it after 6 months or do we need it after 1 year? Route of administration, definitely I think intramuscular is the safest one, but also intranasal, as I mentioned earlier, is something with the single dose will be a better one. Product stability and storage. I'm sure we all have been hearing about the storage condition where some of the vaccine manufacturer has -70 degrees of storage and a very low stability at the room temperature or 2 to 8 versus there are vaccines, and Covishield is one of them, where you can keep the vaccine at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius and the multi-dose use is between 2 and 25 degrees once open within 6 hours. Co-administration, there's a very less data by anybody because you can imagine in this setup, people were more worried about COVID-19, and so there's no co-administration data. Presentation, multi-dose definitely is more preferred presentation in a pandemic setup where you want more people to be inoculated or injected rather than a single dose. So multi-dose is a preferred presentation. And then the UL, whether you meet the characteristics, criteria, and the accessibility, whether can you scale up to meet the demand or the global demand, that's also is a very critical factor for or characteristics for WHO. So this is a UL pathway. So the applicant looks at what data they have, the animal data and the clinical trial reports. They have all the CMC data, and they have the first in human, right? The phase 1/2, the phase 3, and then submit the application to WHO for UL application during an emergency phase. There is an establishment or collaboration between WHO and the local NRA. In our case, it's CDSU office. And there are list of questions. LOQ stands for list of questions, which come by the WHO reviewers. So there's a review panel for CMC, for non-clinical and the clinical. Those are being reviewed and agreed with the applicant, and then the dossier is being shared with them for review. There's a list of questions, applicant responds to them, and if those are acceptable, EUL is granted, condition the local NRA has given emergency approval for it. Now, in this case, if the emergency approval, and for Covishield in terms of Serum Institute, we have received permission in CT21. So that permission, with that permission, we have applied already to WHO in January, and we expect approval in, let's say, early February from WHO for this application. So I'll go quickly now, a few slides on some of the global regulators and how do they see this application. So, and I have taken few where we have actually submitted in last couple of weeks after getting the Indian permission, and we have been successful in getting the emergency use approval for our application from SAFRA. We have submitted in, there's a section 21 for emergency use authorization application that was submitted. There's a application is being right. It's as per the regulation 29 of general medicines regulation. So you submit online, the evaluation is done, and an approval is been granted to the regulator based on all the CMC available CMC comparability in case of Covishield, then the clinical trial data from the phase 3 study. So all these are being reviewed. We had several rounds of questions, responded successfully, and for one of our vaccine, we got the conditional approval for sale of an unregistered medication from SAFRA. So this is proven for Covishield vaccine. Anvisa, Brazil. It's again, we have submitted to Brazil Anvisa after the Indian license for emergency use authorization. We submitted it to Anvisa. The submission was done under the terms of resolution RDC number 444/2020 and the guide number 42/2020. So there are various agencies within Brazil which do the review, and there was almost 5 hours review of the dossier, and it was live public, which was the review of the data was done with Anvisa, and the final recommendations was given for emergency use authorization. And Serum Institute, we were granted emergency use authorization for our product. United Kingdom, well, AstraZeneca, the same Chadox nCoV-19 vaccine was submitted under regulation 174, and they have amended this regulation so that the manufacturer can apply based on a rolling submission. So there's a rolling submission, rolling review. So AstraZeneca had submitted to MHRA under this regulation 174, the data as it was coming, evolving, the process validation, analytical validation, non-clinical data, clinical data as it was flowing. And then finally on 29th of December, AstraZeneca was granted an emergency use authorization under regulation 174 by MHRA. And QP, the qualified person, the last sentence on this slide, they play a very key role in the batch evaluation and release of these batches or a batch of COVID-19 vaccine onto the United Kingdom market. NIBS, which is the National Institute of Biological Standards and Control, they performed an independent testing before the QP reviews all the release and the manufacturing document before it is released onto the market. I think this is my last slide. So United States of America, what is the emergency use pathway? And of course, with the phase 3, we have seen it closely, the data for Pfizer, Moderna, how it was submitted. There was an evaluation within FDA. There was an open public assessment by WorldPAC, which stands basically for vaccines and related biological product advisory committee. So it's a committee, it's a public a debate, discussion, and based on the recommendation of WorldPAC and the review by FDA, the EUA or the emergency use approval is granted for a COVID-19 vaccine, which has been granted to Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Okay, so Dr. Lakshmi, I'm end of my slides, and if I'm open for any discussion, questions, or I can clarify. Most happy.
Thank you so much, Varaji, for your detailed presentation on various countries' regulatory pathways. And now we'll be having the question and answer sessions, and there are a few questions that I can see in the chat box. And as we understand from the NDCP rules 2019, which has clearly defined the regulatory enablers for the accelerated pathways. So it has defined the surrogate endpoints based on which the emergency use authorizations can be given in a pandemic situation. So in COVID vaccine, so what is the surrogate endpoint being taken or being considered for a regulatory approval given to the COVID vaccines by the decision? So that's what one of the audience would like to understand.
Right. So, well, okay. Yeah, you can hear me, right? So, well, we will take the questions, but Dr. Lakshmi, I think the most important in this part, we don't have surrogate markers, right? Because for that, then we'll have to do human challenge studies, and then we understand which is going on in some part of the world. In I know United Kingdom with HVO, one of the CROs there is performing a human challenge study to identify the surrogate markers. But as of today, all the manufacturers in the world, whether it's right, Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, right, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax, they have all done efficacy studies. And what does efficacy study means? It's a placebo-controlled efficacy study, right? Otherwise, once you have a product registered, then placebo control are unethical. But in this situation, you need to know whether the vaccine which you are claiming to be immunogenic and effective, that vaccine actually is effective in the setup, and that can be done only when you have a comparator as placebo. So either you have placebo, or for AstraZeneca studies, what they had done is they have also taken a meningococcal vaccine as a control. So rather than not giving any vaccine and giving a placebo, they preferred giving a vaccine which is meningococcal. So of course it's a blinded study, so you don't, right, the person who's taking the vaccine doesn't know what vaccine they have taken it. But it's a placebo-controlled efficacy study where the number of cases are being seen after the first dose, and then the second dose has been given, and whether after 7 days or after 15 days, how many number of cases of COVID disease are being are detected. So that's how the number of cases are detected, and then you compare the placebo numbers versus the study arm, and you identify the numbers, whether it's 70%, whether it's 80%, or whether it's 90 or 94%, as we have seen with Pfizer or with Moderna. I hope I answered.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for a clear-cut understanding on this trial data evaluation.
Sure. So should we take questions on,
yes,
on the that they're coming?
Yeah, there are questions, some in chat box and some in Q&A.
Correct. So we can take.
I think, Parag, I think that's a very lucid presentation of this vaccine approval regulatory pathway, the globally as well as India. I think most of our regulators would like to ask those questions with respect to not only the technical aspects of it, and also those which really they bother them when they tackle day-to-day activities in their jurisdictions and all. I think some of them related to this and some of them related to that. I think Lakshmi will be trying to take up one by one. I'm sure you will be happy to answer those things.
No problem.
Thank you.
Sir, I'm taking the questions posted in the chat box initially, and then I'll be moving on to the Q&A.
Yeah, we have some of those questions coming from the senior regulators also who are retired and as well as who are working also. I think Lakshmi will take up one by one, I believe.
Yeah, sure. Sir, in case of these restricted use approvals given for the emergency situation, whether these vaccines can be given only to a selected population, or is it allowed to the entire population of the country?
Well, I think it's really it depends on the government, and I'll maybe a little bit go into the supply part of it too, because as we saw, one of the characteristics in the WHO application, one of the characteristics is also to scale up, right, these vaccines, because if you do not have supply enough, and for India you need, right, in millions, right, the first, or maybe, right, if we really want to go to cover the whole India population, then does the vaccine manufacturer has the capacity to really cover all? And if you have 2-dose regime, then do we have enough supply for covering both? So that's the question, and that's where the government agencies, the policymakers, and with experts in vaccine policies, Ministry of Health, they decide which which population can go first, which is most exposed to this disease, and the very simple answer to it is the medical practitioners, frontline workers. These are the people who are exposed almost every day to this disease, with people coming around, and that's why the first choice is everywhere in the world, right? It's not just India, is the frontline workers. So just to give you an example, even the UN agency has taken almost 1 million doses to give it to their frontline workers, right? So that's what they're doing it, and it's I think it's a very realistic a program where you go step by step to cover people who are exposed more, right? And then slowly go into the next population. I hope I answered.
Yes. You have rightly pointed out the strategies adopted by the policy makers to make the frontline workers and other warriors who are fighting for COVID are in the first position to get the vaccine. But if you understand correctly, the permissions are given in general also to the public based on the availability of patients. So once the frontline workers will be getting the vaccine, then in the next phase, the general public will also be able to get the vaccines, and there are no such specific permissions required again by the regulators for supply of those medicines.
Absolutely.
Sorry for intervening. My appeal to all the members who are posting these questions and all, don't get disheartened, because some of the questions which we will be asking to our guest speaker, I think he'll be answering in an elaborate way. If kindly listen to him, I think some of those answers will be there in that one also. Maybe we will be selectively asking certain questions. So I think the answers will be there in his explanation, and all those things will be there. So don't get disheartened with those things and all. Thank you.
So can we little talk about the ADR monitoring, especially for those vaccines granted under emergency use authorization?
Sorry, I didn't get a question. Sorry.
In the case of emergency use approvals for vaccines, what are all the ADR reporting procedural formalities to be adopted by the manufacturers, adverse drug reaction reports.
Right. So, of course, I think in this, especially in this case, it is very important for the AEFIs and the AESIs, right? Reporting, and I think this is something which is being discussed very in detail with DCGI, with the subject expert committee, and this is a part of the condition too, which is as a manufacturer they have to submit the AEFIs and the AESIs at a very strict timelines. So for example, Health Canada says you have to submit within 15 days, calendar days. So similar is in India, where you need to submit at a certain time point, which is 2 weeks. You have to submit all the AEFIs and AESIs. And if there is something in between, you need to investigate, then you need to investigate and report it back to DCGI. So it's a very, I would say, very a little stricter than the normal vaccines.
There are very specific questions on the products, and in the interest of time and in the interest of the topic, I'll not be taking to product specific questions, and I'll be taking only those questions which are in general related to the current practices adopted by the nation or by other nations.
Correct. So maybe I can just add to what I just said,
Yes.
Dr. Lakshmi, is also when there is something called risk management plan and a specific pharmacovigilance plan, right? And how do you have this risk mitigated, basically, right? With a very a structured question and answer is ready with the manufacturer, and there's a risk management plan which is being prepared, discussed, reviewed with DCGI and the expert group before that is being implemented. So pharmacovigilance is something being taken very seriously, and there's a plan associated with that. Coming to some of the questions, maybe very quickly, phase 1 data, nobody in the world, you as a regulator will not accept a phase 1 data for any kind of permission. So even if you look at Usfda or EMA, they have not compromised anything lesser than phase 3 data. So whether it's Moderna, Pfizer, or with AstraZeneca in UK, or yesterday with EMA, they have reviewed the phase 3 global data before they have given their emergency use permission. Now, when the final report will be available, well, it should be in months, I would say, right? Because it depends on where you started. But minimum any agency has asked is around 6 months. So 6 months follow-up and the data is required. And that should come somewhere, I would say, in coming months for each of the vaccines globally.
Yeah, one of the trickiest question I think probably everybody was looking at is the kind of AEFI, which is coming from various parts of the country, including state of Andhra Pradesh, where we have a couple of, I think, a death at least, and another one is a serious condition. So I believe you must also have received these kind of reports, from various parts of the country. So how is that you are trying to address these things? I'm sure this is about a product, maybe the comorbidity issues, and because there's not much of comorbidity, because the kind of vaccinations is being done is only for the healthcare workers who are the ASHA workers, or even the doctors and all. So is there anything which you have at your place to address these things, and what is it like?
Absolutely, sir. So as I mentioned, so the point about deaths. So deaths, yes, there are some deaths. We have seen it, right? Those are very few within India, and it's spread over. So it's not concentrated in any of the regions. And the good thing, what is happening with this vaccine and the campaign is there is also reporting directly to the central database. So many of the reporting is direct to the central rather than only giving it to the manufacturer. So there are some coming to the manufacturer. And of course, if the central database office sees there is an investigation which has been required, then we are being asked as a manufacturer to do the investigation and report back immediately to those answers. And I think the central database review has not associated any of the deaths to the vaccine. The causality is not associated vaccine. So till date, touch wood, none of the death are being reported by the central authorities or the review to the manufacturer. So I think the good thing, Raja Bhanu Garu, is also there's a very systematic follow-up which has been done for each death, right? There's a post-mortem, there's a report being done, right? The history is being checked for that person. So just like in a clinical setup, all these are being followed. So I think till date, no causal vaccine-related deaths are being seen, at least at our end.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the causality analysis is being done by the team there itself, and I think that's being. I'm just trying to check with what is that at your end you are trying to address these things, or what is it like and all. That's, I think, for the benefit of all our members here, because these kind of questions are also coming to the regulators when they face at the grassroots level at their working place and all.
Right.
There is one more question regarding the administration of the dose and the type of dose. So suppose since the immunogenicity lasts for an year or 2 years for a specific vaccine, so in the subsequent period, can the person take the vaccine manufactured by other company, or he is supposed to take the same vaccine he has got in the previous period?
See, it's a very good question, and in vaccine interchangeability has been a big topic and debate, and all regulators has been pushing manufacturers to generate such data. But as you can imagine, all manufacturers right now were speeding up to get their own vaccine developed, and again the full results are still to be obtained and reviewed for the full authorization. So the answer, a simple answer is no. There is no vaccine interchangeability data as of today. However, those studies will be part of maybe the post-licensure as we go into, and we don't know how long the COVID-19 disease really will last, whether 3 years, 4 years, or right, we have something like influenza where we have to take every year basically. So we don't know yet how long it will last.
Thank you, sir. So there is another question, which we got to know from our previous discussions with vaccine manufacturers. So as per the WHO requirements, every single batch to be released on the market to be tested by CDM. And we are hearing that in the coming days, where multiple number of batches and million doses are to be manufactured for the supply to the entire nation. So currently, the facilities of CDL are taking a lot of time for the complete test and the release of for giving the release certificate. So in the current scenario, how does the WHO or other organizations are looking at a mandatory testing and mandatory batch release certificate of the national regulatory authority or the regulatory laboratory? Is there any kind of a discussions happening at WHO level, or in the industry perspective, what do you feel? Can we request for a kind of a temporary waiver or basing on the dossier assessment review itself?
Right. So I can definitely speak as from a manufacturer's point of view, and and CDL has their own authority. But in general, CDL, according to the WHO TRS for all the national control laboratories under WHO accreditation, do not test each and every lot, and they don't have to do it. Once a manufacturing consistency is been seen by the authority, and in this case, basically, we don't have that consistency, or I would say number of batches. But as we develop from a manufacturer's point of view, as we have, let's say, 30 batch, 50 batches with CDL Kasoli, and they have looked at it, or the National Control Laboratory, then definitely there are a lot of things which, as a manufacturer, we would request. And right, and there are seniors who can also help this from right, something which can be brought up to the forum is that it can be done in parallel. So you can ship the product in parallel. Don't release it at the end. For example, we are shipping from here to Nigeria, and you can ship the vaccine to Nigeria, but don't in under quarantine. Don't release it till you get the release certificate from CDL. And once you have it, then you have the quarantine lifted and the batches released onto the market. So those are the time management which has to be played. And I'm certain basically that that's something which is being discussed in parallel with the authorities. And we are hopeful that we will find some way out of this. But that's a very, very valid question, that once you start getting 50 and 100 batches at one point, then how do you do it, basically each and every batch?
Thank you, sir. And I guess we have taken most of the valid questions from the chat box and Q&A. It seems there are quite targeted questions, but which I would like. I mean, I would prefer not to take those questions which are very specific to a product or specific to a company. And
I think Parag, if you don't mind, I think we will give your email ID to our regulators and all. I think they have a specific things and all. They can easily contact you through email for their queries and all. I think I hope you will be spoiling your Sunday also.
Banu.
Yes, sir.
Let them write to Lakshmi or AIDCOC, so we can screen that. Otherwise,
yes,
it's going to be an additional
burden
to the speaker, and the speakers will be scared of coming to our functions. Let the people send their queries to AIDCOC.
Yes, sir. Yes,
to Lakshmi.
Yes, sir.
So that we can forward whenever if there are any valid questions, so that it will make Parag's job very simple, and our job is also very simple.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Right.
I think Parag, I have seen a slide where I think probably we all know that the vaccine development, like in one generation when it gets developed, and only the next generation will have the benefit of it. That kind of a scenario was there earlier. And now we are seeing a vaccine being produced, a vaccine being an R&D, and then getting released in a rolling, as you rightly mentioned, the rolling kind of a thing. In a real-time sense, it has been evaluated and then being released for an emergency use and all those things. And with the kind of regulatory things which are brought into our act, where it can be approved simultaneously with respect to when that phase trials are there, and also apply for 27D and take the manufacturing also simultaneously. So my question is, the kind of risk what you have taken is, what is it like? I think.
Yeah, so it's thank you very much, Rajabanu Garu, because that's a very big question as a manufacturer, and I see a question that well, with this vaccine and the regulators were rushed with the regulatory approvals. It's also, the risk is also on the manufacturer side, right? So that's why I started with a comment, which is a partnership which is really unprecedented. I think we can learn a lot of things in last 1 year, not just as a regulator, as a manufacturer, as a common man, as a common person, right? We have learned a lot to work together. This webinars, I think, to connect, right? I know Uday Bhaskar Garu and you are very personal connection people, but I think this is the way of life now, right? So we are connected. Regulators are looking at it in a very different way. Manufacturers are putting efforts. Funders are giving money, like Bill Gates, Gavi, and you have all the support to manufacture at risk. Of course, it's at risk because imagine if the study wouldn't have given 70% efficacy and it would have been 48, then we would have been right in a totally different situation. So I think it's a risk taken by everyone. But the good thing is, I would call it a very good teamwork of everyone, including the regulators, the manufacturers, the policymakers, the funders, right, who have funded all these things, and the common people believing in all these things. So I think we have lived to their hopes, and as you said it rightly, I know a vaccine in Sanofi took 20 years to come, 20 years, and here within 1 year we have a vaccine. Of course, it's an emergency use approval, but within a year we have, and I don't think we have taken shortcuts. We have increased our speed to review, and we have worked, everyone has worked Saturdays, Sundays, nights, right? Approving, reviewing documents and visiting, even in this COVID, going and inspecting sites, right? Exposing yourself. So I think it's an unprecedented move, speed with which each one of us has moved. And let's take the good things out of this. That's my request. And I know you always will support that. Let's take the good things out of it, and how can we improve and implement it for our future submissions, where we can, as a manufacturer, give a better understanding of the product development, discuss it with the regulators, be open, be transparent, and work together, which I think is a good start for working together with the regulators. So I think it's a fantastic journey we have started. Let's continue the transparency, the openness, the integrity from manufacturers towards regulators, and let's build on this for future vaccines. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Well said, Paragji. And in fact, these times have taught us all to work in collaboration and in tandem, not as a separate entity, as a regulator, as one body, and manufacturer or supplier as a one body. So we are all working together for the benefit of the nation. And in fact, so everybody, every stakeholder involved in this organization or in this in the current setup of the working functionality is working very hard without compromising anything, not on the safety or not on the efficacy of the product. And everybody is working hard to get the best product available to the country's population. With that, we are closing to the end of the program, and we are very much thankful to Paragji for sparing your valuable time despite your busy schedule in the current times where every country is looking at Serum Institute for having a product for the nation, and we are so fun.
Yeah, can I add
please,
one thing?
Please.
Can I add, Lakshmi, one thing before you close that? I still remember in March 2020 when Bhaskar Garu went on air saying that this is a pharmacy of the world. India is the pharmacy of the world, and they're trying to supply HCQ wherever it is required, whoever is requiring. And coming March this year, I think again India, the pharmacy of the world, is ready to supply vaccines.
Absolutely.
Anywhere, any place. I think such a coincidental in a year, it has transformed and truly lived that title for this country, and the title is well on their skin for the pharma biz also. I think with this, I think a very lucid presentation. Thank you so much, Paragji. I think Lakshmi will be having the last word. Thank you so much for being on this one.
Our Secretary General has made my job very simple by expressing the thoughts of AIDCOC in his words. We are so thankful to Rajbanu sir for your warm words. And finally, we extend our heartfelt thanks from AIDCOC to AIDCOC family, not only to the Paragji, but to the entire Serum Institute who has kind enough to spare their senior professionals for the webinars of AIDCOC. Thank you so much, sir. And we look forward to have you in our future programs. And
absolutely, I can never say no to Bhaskar Garu. So
thank you, Parag. Thank you so much, and nice to see you after 2-3 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your patient listening.